Penguin Random House Audio presents White Tears, Brown Scars: How White Feminism Betrays Women of Color by Ruby Hamad. Read for you by Mozhan Marnò. For the Forgotten Ones. He hit me and wept. Then he was first to protest. Arab proverb. Author's note. Writing about race is a fraught business, as is writing about gender. Words and phrases you assume would be easily received exactly as you intended them are bafflingly interpreted as something else entirely. Concepts such as the meaning of racism itself, arrived at over generations of painstaking scholarship, research, and experience, are stubbornly brushed aside in favor of the dictionary definition. This note sets out the main terms and concepts I use throughout this book, both for the benefit of the listener and to safeguard as best I can against misrepresentations made in bad faith. My own experience as a media writer of 12 years standing tells me that this will almost certainly occur regardless, but consider this my best attempt to ward off that regrettable inevitability. I have opted to use brown in the title, both as a poetic license indicating a catch-all for all those people who don't qualify as white, and to indicate where I place myself in the race scheme of things. However, brown, in which I include all non-black people of color, will be differentiated from black throughout the book. It is important to understand that virtually all terms used when discussing race are imprecise because race is an imposition, not a biological reality. As such, who is white and who isn't is not as simple as it once was. While often used to denote the skin color of Europeans in relation to Native Americans and enslaved Africans, white is better understood as an indication of racial privilege. Who is considered white is less about how pale they are and more about whether they are the right kind of pale. Many Arabs have fair skin, and my own is more olive than brown. This racial ambiguity affords me some degree of acceptance, until my ethnic background is inevitably brought to the foreground. Whiteness, then, is more than skin color. It is, as race scholar Paul Kivel describes, a constantly shifting boundary separating those who are entitled to have certain privileges from those whose exploitation and vulnerability to violence are justified by their not being white. Whiteness is the privileging of those racial, cultural, and religious identities that most resemble the typical characteristics associated with fair-skinned Western Europeans. Consequently, the terms white and people of color are not descriptive. They are political. When we talk about white people, we are not really talking about skin color, but about those who most benefit from whiteness. When we talk about people of color, we talk about those who are excluded. I continue to have misgivings about the terms, due to the proximity of people of color to colored, as well as the danger that it can collapse the needs and issues of certain marginalized racial groups into others, but the lack of better terms necessitates their use at times. Expressions such as non-white imply whiteness is a neutral default, and it can get cumbersome and redundant to list the various categories of brown, black, Asian, Arab, and so on individually. A content note. Some of the out-of-use historical terms employed by colonizers to degrade women of color are reproduced in this book in order to discuss their meaning and usage. I have chosen, however, not to reproduce certain slurs that are still in widespread use and/or are particularly heinous, though I concede that this is a fine line and a subjective one at that. Finally, a note on the featured interviews. I spoke with more than 24 women from across the Western world during the course of writing White Tears, Brown Scars. Not all of them are directly quoted, but all of them informed the shape of this book. It has been quite the eye-opener to discover how similar the experiences of women of color who have never met can be. Some of these women I know personally and/or professionally, some I'd previously interacted with on social media, and others were either referred to me or contacted me directly asking to participate. Interviews took place in person, by telephone, via Skype, and in a few cases, over email. Part 1. The Setup. Introduction. White Tears. We talk about toxic masculinity, but there is also toxicity in wielding femininity in this way. Lovey Ajayi. I am so uncomfortable having this conversation, said Fox News host Melissa Francis during a live broadcast of the network's panel program Outnumbered on August 16, 2017. The previous day, U.S. President Donald Trump held a press conference denouncing the Charlottesville riots that ended in tragedy when a white supremacist drove his car through a group of people protesting a far-right rally, killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer. Trump had audaciously claimed both sides were to blame for the violence and that there were very fine people on both sides. This sparked countless debates across the country, much like the one Francis was engaged in with her co-panelists, Harris Faulkner, Juan Williams, and Marie Harf. Defending Trump, Francis claimed he was being misrepresented and had never tried to apportion equal blame. When her co-host attempted to correct her, she became visibly emotional. I know what is in my heart, and I know that I don't think anyone is different, better or worse, based on the color of their skin. Her voice cracked. But I feel like there is nothing any of us can say right now without being judged. No sooner had the word judged left her lips than the tears started. The panel fell into an awkward silence for a moment, and it was left to co-host Faulkner, a black woman, to calmly step in and, without a trace of emotion in her voice or on her face, to respond. You know, Melissa, there have been a lot of tears on our network and across the country and around the world. Faulkner began quietly but firmly while the other woman closed her eyes and shook her head, as if in pain. It's a difficult place where we are, but it's not where we've been, it's where we are. And we can have this conversation. Oh, yes, we can. What should be remarkable about this clip is that it is the black woman who remains stoic and almost expressionless, while the white woman is freely emotional and teary. Keep in mind, this is all in the midst of a conversation about race taking place in the same week that white supremacists had staged rallies waving Nazi and Confederate flags and shouting slogans such as "blood and soil" and "Jews will not replace us." I say it should be remarkable because, sadly, it is all too unremarkable. It has been so common for so long for people of color to tiptoe around the feelings of white people that until relatively recently it was barely ever commented on in the mainstream. Indeed, after Faulkner's comments, two of the other hosts, including Williams, who is a black man, quickly tried to soothe Francis, repeating how much they hated to see her cry. How is it that we have been so conditioned to prioritize the emotional comfort of white people? Why does the sight of a white woman crying provoke such placatory responses, even in a context such as this, where people of color have every right to be scared, upset, and even angry? It was not until the following year that I finally began to understand just how crucial it is that we answer these questions. Fast forward to August 2018, and I almost missed the message in my Twitter inbox from a journalist in the United States asking to speak to me about an article I'd published in Guardian Australia 3 months earlier. That piece had proved to be very popular and very polarizing and had resulted in far more global attention than I was used to or felt comfortable with. And, still reeling from it all, I assumed she was messaging me to ask if she could interview me for a story. I cautiously agreed to supply my email but was unprepared for what came next. Lisa Benson, an Emmy-winning African-American television journalist in Kansas City, was writing to me not to request an interview, but to let me know that shortly after my piece was published in May, she had shared it to her private Facebook page, where 2 white female colleagues, Krista Dubill and Jessica McMaster, had seen it. The next day, Dubill and McMaster complained to management, and Lisa was suspended immediately for creating a hostile working environment based on race and gender. Shortly thereafter, she was terminated from her contract. A little backstory. Lisa had already sued her television station employer for racial discrimination, alleging her race was used to determine which stories she was assigned. This included being sent on her own to interview a Ku Klux Klan member in his home, a situation that was both uncomfortable and possibly unsafe. A separate lawsuit was brought by another colleague of hers, a male African-American sports anchor, who claimed he was routinely passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified white men. Lisa was still working for the organization while awaiting her court date, and she told me she had shared the article in the hope that her colleagues would understand and empathize with her situation. Instead, it appears they used it as a handy justification for getting rid of a problem employee who'd inadvertently broke one of white Western society's
Sample complete. Ready to continue?